I am going to introduce our speaker for today. Our speaker today is the Venerable Samiddha, aka Venerable Falun. He was born in Medan, Indonesia. In 2014, he studied Buddhism at the Fuyan Buddhist Institute in Taiwan. In 2015, he joined the monastic under the guidance of Venerable Ekayana in Malaysia. In 2018, he graduated from Fuyan Buddhist Institute as the best graduate of his class. After graduating, he actively preached and taught the Dharma in Indonesia and Malaysia. From 2019 to 2023, he came to Houston to pursue his academic studies in philosophy and religion. At the same time, he assisted the Texas Buddhist Association in conducting various religious services and delivering Dharma talks. Now he is attending graduate school at the University of Washington in Seattle, conducting study and research in Buddhist studies. His expertise include early Buddhist manuscripts, the history of Indian Buddhism, meditation, philology, and philosophy. One of his mottos is to live your life wholly and entirely with all the bitterness and sweetness, for the next life is so mysterious. And with that, if everyone will please stand, we will do our bows. We'll do 3 bows to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. And 1 bow to our speaker, the Venerable Samiddha. Y'all, thank y'all very much. You can be seated. Alrighty, it's yours, Samiddha.
All right, thank you. I'm gonna share my screen. Okay. So good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming today. And before we begin, I'd like us to recite the verse to pay homage to the Buddha. Please join your palms together. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Right. So today I'm beginning a new series titled The Buddhist Scholastic Tradition with a special focus on the Northern tradition. I invite all of you to join me monthly whenever you see this topic in the newsletter so we can journey together from beginning to end. But for today's opening talk, I won't dive into the core scholastic content just yet. Instead, I want to begin with a reflection on how Buddhism has lived through time, shaped by conditions, preserved through insight, and now entrusted to us. So to do this, I'll share 8 introductory points on Buddhism based on the insights of Venerable Yin Sun, one of the most influential modern thinkers of Chinese Buddhism. These points are foundational and will guide our understanding in the month to come. So the first point is that Buddhism is a religion. This is quite a general statement, right? Some of you might agree, some of you might disagree, but it is a religion. So Buddhism is a religion distinct from theistic religions. Suppose one studies it merely as a general cultural phenomenon or as an ordinary theistic religion. In that case, one will not correctly understand it, regardless of how we define religion. Whether it involves God or not, Buddhism is considered a religion. Suppose we define religion as involving a concept of God. In that case, Buddhism has a concept of God too, which appears under different names such as Nirvana, Dharmakaya, or the Dharma body, and others. If religion must have divine beings, We can also name many divine beings such as Avalokitesvara, Amitabha Buddha, viewed as a divine savior, Dharma protector spirits, and various kinds of gods and goddesses in heaven. Even if you view Buddhism as a philosophy, way of life, folklore, or cultural phenomenon, it's still as correct as you described, right? So, however, the matter is not whether Buddhism falls into a specific category. We need to understand that Buddhism can be viewed from different angles, including theistic, folklore, historical, and even philosophical perspectives. So we need to be aware of the multifaceted of Buddhism. It doesn't have any central core emphasis on particular teaching, nor does it have to be that way. That is the beauty of Buddhism, in which we can learn it without pressure on and learn whichever aspect is useful to us. So the other two extremes are secularization and deification of Buddhism. These two processes will not lead to the flourishing of Buddhism. Buddhism as a religion has its own beauty and can stand on its own without being secularized and or deified. In the history of Chinese Buddhism, for example, there has been an overemphasis on death rituals and spirits. Recognizing this, if you know about Master Taishi, he especially advocated for a human life Buddhism, 人生佛教, as a remedy, reorienting our practice toward the living realities of human existence. But the downside of this type of Buddhism is that people begin to pursue a rebirth in heavenly realms or to worship celestial beings as opposed to ghosts and spirits. So, Master In Shun modified this and proposed a human world Buddhism, or often known as humanistic Buddhism, that is neither ghostified, I don't know if that's even English, nor deified, but fully grounded in the human world, as opposed to any other realms in Buddhist cosmology. This can truly explain the genuine meaning of Buddhism. So our focus here shifts from, if we look from the perspective of Buddhist cosmology, we only focus on the human realm only. Buddhism is only useful for humans in the human world, not in heaven or any other realms. This can be seen from the appearance of a Buddha that only occurs in the human realm. So this is the first point. Second, Dharma originated from the Buddha's enlightenment. So here's the cautions. The Dharma indeed comes from the Buddha's enlightenment. However, the Buddha's teaching and rules in the world are not completely identical with the Buddha's perfect awakening, as they were given in response to specific circumstances and established accordingly, right? So we have the Dharma as the ultimate truth out there. But then we also have the Buddha's teaching, or also mean Dharma, in the world that are tailored to specific needs and circumstances according to the time, place, and people at the time. The circumstances and requirements are that the teachings must be tailored to human understanding and capacity. Through them, one can be guided toward true awakening. This is also why Buddhism is a religion that serves as a refuge for all people. It's not spoken exclusively for a minority. Thus, although Buddhism is extremely profound, it must be rooted in the ordinary. From that human foundation, we ascend together toward liberation. The Dharma is not for isolation or elitism. It's a path for all beings. For instance, I can teach rules for monks. I cannot teach rules for monks to the lay people because then lay people cannot or will not practice them. The same goes for the level of understanding. I can't discuss profound lessons in Buddhism with beginners. They wouldn't understand a single word. this will be very discouraging and intimidating, right? So we need to learn Buddhism according to our own level of understanding and acceptability of the prescribed practice. So in other words, the Dharma is the most profound teaching out there, but the real Buddhist teaching on the ground, it must fit the level of understanding and the practicality according to the listener. The third point is Dharma and Vinaya, or rules of in Buddhism, were established by the Buddha based on the adaptation of time, space, and person. So this one is kind of continuing from the second statement that the Buddha established the Dharma and rules in response to specific conditions of time, place, and people. This adaptation is called skillful means, such a big term in Buddhism, especially from Mahayana tradition. The adaptation is not just a random adaptation for convenience, but it must have the possibility of moving toward awakening, aligning with awakening, and entering awakening. There are two problems with this. The first one, if one treats the Dharma and Vinaya as universally applicable as what we often think of, assuming that place makes no distinction between center and periphery and time no difference between past and present, such timeless absolute view, ignoring context, causes us to become rigid and constrictive. Conversely, if we abandon all established guidance, following only our own ideas while rejecting the traditions, and believe we can attain awakening through mere spontaneity, the risk drifting outside the bounds of the Dharma. So both extremes, rigidity and recklessness, hinder the practice of Dharma. The fourth point, Dharma and Vinaya, established in response to conditions, are conventional truths as it is propagated in the world. So the teaching about independent origination that we've been talking about throughout the previous Heart Sutra series, in which things arise from conditions and cease with the cessation of the conditions, also cannot avoid evolving and developing in response to time, place, and people. Although the Dharma is universal, if you want to think as this way, the external forms of Buddhism, its thoughts, institution, and cultural experience are constantly in flux. This is what we learned from the two previous series, the Diamond Sutra and Heart Sutra. The universal Dharma is the ultimate truth, and the changing Dharma is the conventional truth. They are not contradicting, but there are two different modes that operate within two different realms. Throughout the history of Buddhism, the Buddha's teaching has a pattern of moving from subtle to manifest, from indistinct to clearly defined. For instance, at first, in the period of early Buddhism, we know the notion of non-self or anatta or an atman in Sanskrit, but later we have the concept of tathagata garbha or the seed of awakening or the self. So we move from non-self, which is very subtle concept, to a more concrete concept of the self, Atman. Even in the later period of Buddhism, we have the concept of the self, although it's very different from the soul or concept in any other religions. And also, at first, the Buddha teaches only in verses, right? Such as Dharmapada, right? And consisting of one or two statements, sometimes with stories, similes, or metaphors. Later, we see all different kinds of further explication and analysis of phenomena, showing the mind is not just one single mind. For example, in the Abhidharma, but consists of 6 consciousnesses with their corresponding mental factors, counting up to 100. This is what we are going to study in the following month because we are talking about Buddhist scholastic tradition. What is Buddhist scholastic tradition? What is scholastic here mean? It means Abhidharma, basically. So we are going to talk about Abhidharma, but not really Abhidharma. We are going to situate the Abhidharma within the history of Buddhism in India and in today's society as well. So this is an inevitable course in the evolution of ideas. Adaptation to particular times and places or resonance with specific capacities of being naturally results in the special development, whether focal or partial, or of certain aspects. So externally, adaptations may arise from engaging with non-Buddhist systems of thought or from efforts to reduce external pressures. These modifications are often unavoidable in the spread of dharma. Look, right? I myself, as a Buddhist teacher, I get this question a lot from the common public. The question is like, if there is no self, what is it that transgress from life to life? Or the question such as if Buddhism emphasizes on suffering or dukkha, what's the difference is it with pessimism, for example? So in response to these challenges and questions, I can't just stick with a traditional set of answer and must develop some ideas that are easy to digest and acceptable to the public. The sages from the past did the same thing, such as in Abhidharma. The notion, the concept developed. And that's why we have the concept of alaya, the consciousness, the thing in which it is the subtle consciousness that transgresses from life to life. So usually, normally, if we stick to the traditional text, the answer is that the 5 aggregates transgress from life to life. There's no single thing that move from life to life. But in a later period, we have this concept of alaya, the subtle consciousness that move from life to life. So regarding the question of suffering, is Buddhism always about suffering? Is it that pessimist? Well, the normative text will tell you, yes, it's all about suffering. But then in a current society, we can't just say it's all only about suffering. So modification exists here, right? So Buddhism is not only about suffering, it has the pleasure aspect. Sometimes we emphasize on that in that way. And one can still pursue the pleasure and satisfaction of learning the Dharma and practicing the Dharma. One can pursue any ambitions as long as we do it with mindfulness and doesn't attach to the end result. From the perspective of Buddhism in the human world, change is not only natural, it's necessary. There's the important point, okay? However, the Dharma possesses essential characteristics that make it what it is. No matter how it changes, one must not ignore these defining features. You might ask, what's the defining feature? These are the things we learn from our EDG class each week. The more we listen, read, learn, the more we get a sense of the defining feature of Buddhism. When certain aspects such as meditative practice, philosophical doctrine, institutional structure, esotericism, popularization, or devotionalism are overly emphasized or disproportionately developed, extremism may emerge, harming both integrity and the social nature of the Dharma. So when adapting to or incorporating external ideas, if the distinct qualities of the Dharma are not safeguarded, then over time, the boundary between Buddha and Mara, or good and evil, may become blurred. These are realities within the history of Buddhism. Evolution and development do not automatically equate to progress and correctness. If the in the history of Buddhism in India, Buddhism evolved and developed, but in the end they were quite far from correctness to a better condition. In the end, Buddhism declined and disappeared in India around the 13th century. So we have to note this that evolution and development are not necessarily progression and even correct. Fifth point, the rise, development, and decline of Indian Buddhism is like a human life. Innocence and vitality in childhood are certainly admirable, but isn't it even more meaningful when such innocence matures into adulthood? Yet, if one enters adulthood without cherishing and preserving what is essential, decline may follow in the blink of an eye. Old age may bring rich experience and abundant knowledge, but does that necessarily signify maturity? It could just as well indicate that approach of decay and death. Therefore, we shouldn't subscribe to the view that the older, the truer, nor should we sympathize with the idea that the later, the more complete and ultimate. We like to think that early Buddhism, as found in the Pali Nikaya or Chinese agamas, has more original teachings of Buddhism. Here we can see that we connect early to the original and thus better in the sense that they have not been contaminated yet. But is it the case? It's like a human life where childhood is innocent and pure but lacks of energy, power, and vision. Some Buddhists will say that Buddhism from a later period is better and more complete. Again, just like human life, although old age is seen as having experience and praiseworthy, and sages are often portrayed as old guys with long hair, long beards, and carrying a stick, it's actually closer to death, and there's nothing much it can do. So if we were to choose, we should learn from adulthood or Buddhism at its prime period. What form of Buddhism was it in this period? It was early Mahayana, represented by the Prajnaparamita Sutra, the Diamond Sutra, and the Heart Sutra, some of which we have learned and been exposed to. In terms of its historicity, Buddhism earned its prestige and enduring life during this adult period, beginning from the 1st century BCE to the 7th or 8th century. In terms of content, the Madhyamaka, or the concept of middle path through emptiness, has its unique place in Buddhism, in which it only appears in Buddhism and a total absence in other sects or religions. So in the end, I'm not saying only adulthood is the best. Each stage has its own functions and benefits within its time period, which we cannot neglect. Notice also that each period has its own authoritative canon. So when we come to the idea of canon, quote unquote, right? This again challenges the idea of a single authoritative canon. Again, from the first point to fifth point, I repeatedly say again and again that Buddhism doesn't have a single core teaching, to put it this way. So if we only emphasize on the canon from a particular tradition or language as the best, the original, it doesn't work that way. For example, if we take the Pali Canon as the right canon, we are only choosing one out of three equally authoritative canons. So these three canons from these three periods with three different languages have the same status, which are equally authoritative in their sense. In terms of language, the early canon is preserved in Pali. The middle period is preserved in Chinese as the only surviving language of the canon, not the original language, but the translation. And the later period is preserved in Tibetan and Chinese languages as well. Okay. 6. Buddhism is not just about theory, nor is it just about practice and realization. So you started to getting the sense of what I'm talking here today. It's a middle path, actually, not falling into either one of the extreme. Both theory and practice must be assessed through their actual expression in real world conduct, how one engages with people and responds to circumstances. Theory, practice, and realization are all parts of the path. It's impossible to choose only one and neglecting the other. However, we can focus on one at a time. For instance, during the meditation retreat that you all just been doing last week or last month, right, with the Bhante, we don't deal with theory, but just do meditation or the practice itself. It doesn't mean that we don't need to listen to the Dharma talk or study the scripture anymore throughout our study of Buddhism. After all, what liberates us from samsara is wisdom, not a meditative state or jhana, right? No matter how good you are at meditation, it's not going to liberate us. The one that's going to liberate us is the wisdom. And where does this wisdom come from? Not the experience, although it's part of it, but the wisdom from what we learn from the scripture, from the sages, from the teacher. And then we internalize it into our own practice. So it's like it's like two wings of a bird. It's not an airplane. Airplane, you can fly it with only one engine, one wing, but a bird, you need two wings for you to fly, right? This is the sixth. So when we talk about theory and practice, again, we will encounter this question. If we talk about theory, which teaching? So it depends on which teaching we ascribe to, which tradition that we subscribe to. The same as the practice. Buddhism has a vast, multifaceted areas of practice that you can do. Some of you might just focus or only know that Buddhism only teaches meditation, for example, or only teaches mindfulness, but it has its ritual aspect. It has its theoretical, philosophical, historical aspect that you can dig into if you want to explore. It has its own story, cosmology, right, method that you can explore. Seventh, all forms of Buddhism originated in India and adapted to the local culture. So the Dharma should be followed by seeking its true essence. Therefore, while we respect local adaptation, such as in the forms of Chinese Buddhism or Western Buddhism, we must place even greater emphasis on Indian Buddhism, where it came from. Master Insun says, I don't align myself with sectarian loyalties, nor am I constrained by nationalistic sentiment. I can be sure that all of you who are members of the English Dharma group EDG do not have this sectarian attitude, especially our EDG program is highly non-sectarian. As we invite different teachers from different backgrounds and traditions, I don't see this in any other places, at least from what I know. Most of the teachers come from, in other places, come from the same member or circle within the community, and they teach according to the organization's agenda. However, I know for some this is not ideal, our EDG program, because we don't have a structured curriculum. But if someone asks you what's special about EDG program, perhaps you can say we have nothing, but also everything, right? 8. We must learn from the past and take the lessons from the rise and decline of Buddhism in the past. Having known this picture, this big picture, We should learn from the history of Indian Buddhism. It is not enough to admire only the glories of the past. We must examine the inner causes of Buddhism's decline. We must ask, why did the Dharma sometimes fade? What errors and what imbalances led to loss? Buddhism should not be treated as a museum relic preserved for scholarly study and academic reference. It's a living path. It's your path, it's mine. To do this, we need to make Buddhism relevant to ourselves. What have I gained from practicing the Dharma? And also, what can I give back? What can I make? How can I make Buddhism meaningful, not only for myself, but also people around me? So the aspect of relevance is really important here, and it's kind of determinative whether you want to come to listen to my talk or not, because sometimes it's too scholarly, you wouldn't come the second time, or it's too easy and you wouldn't come the second time. Or even it's good, it's a great talk, right? But it's irrelevant to my life. I won't use it. So this is the challenge, right? How the speaker kind of relate the teaching to the audience and how the listener relate the teaching to their own life. So it's both our works, right? It's not only my responsibility to make the talk interesting, to attract people to come and listen, and I have to modify the teaching to suit your need only and harming the teaching itself. But sometimes it's also the listener, right? Your responsibility to make sense of my talk, even though sometimes it's not relevant, but still you have to take away the lessons out of these 8 points today. Okay, so now I'm gonna introduce you to this text called Athakatha. Where is it in the canon? It's in the Sutta Nipata, or in the bigger position, it's in the Khuddaka Nikaya, which is considered one of the most earliest teaching of the Buddha. It has the same position as the Dharmapada. So you can access Dharmapada books easily, right? You can even get it after the talk, as have been told by you just now before the talk. So this Athakatha is also one of the earliest teaching. If you want to know what's the earliest teaching of the Buddha, see the Dharmapada. Even if you want to know what's earlier than Dharmapada, it could be Athakatha. So I just want to give you a random sample, really random. I didn't specifically. Why did I choose this? I don't know. I just pick it random from the earliest teaching of the Buddha. And then I'm going to compare it to the very, very late teaching of the Buddha in the Mahayana or the Tantric canon. And you can see the comparison, how it adapted, how it modifies to suit the circumstances on that era. But even though on the surface it's kind of different, but can you draw a red line, a one core single teaching, or the similarity, what the Buddha wants to say, or what at least what the written canon want to tell us? So for example, right, this is from the old age section. It comes into this kind of verse. Short, Alice, is this life. You die before 100 years. Even if you live a little longer, you still die of old age. Aphorism, right? This is kind of a universal truth. It doesn't have any single fancy word in it. It doesn't have any difficult concept. It's just there. We all die. Even though you live more than 100, you can't pass 200. You can't pass 300. Okay, the next. People grieve over belongings, yet there is no such thing as permanent possessions. Separation is a fact of life. When you see this, you wouldn't stay living at home. Okay? Because we're all gonna die. And then if we skip forward to the fifth verse, we see this. You used to see and hear those folk and call them by their name, yet the name is all that's left to tell of a person when they're gone. First, I'm gonna die. Second, you're gonna die. So what's left in this world is only the name that we often cling to. Like we cling to our fame, possession, name, and all of that, wealth. But in the end, what's left? Nothing. So um, the last verse that I want to show you is that the sage is independent everywhere. They don't form likes or dislikes. Lamentation and stinginess slip off them like water from a leaf. In terms of structure, we got a general statement and we got a teaching in the middle. And also we have the simile or the metaphor, like water from a leaf. From what kind of leaf is this? It's a lotus leaf. So the water doesn't stick to the lotus leaf, it just slip off like that. So it's just like our life in this world. We don't want to stick to the word or attach to everything in the word because we are just guests in this world for, let's say, our rent only lasts for 100 years maximum nowadays, and then we have to move into another house. I'm speaking in terms of a metaphor, right? So if you think about it, don't have too much belongings because we can't carry all of them when we move out, or even it's gonna be so expensive if you want to move out, if you have a lot of belongings, in the sense that we're gonna grieve a lot the more we have our belongings. And then we're gonna compare it to the later. It's the sutra from a very, very late period, and it's titled Sutra on the Disciple Died and Came Back to Life. What does it mean? Yeah, it's literally in the story. This is the disciple of the Buddha. One day, this disciple dies, and then all the family surrounding him and crying and wishing him for the best. And then suddenly he opens his eyes, and everyone is not scared, but happy because he came back to life. So the content is as this: all who are born must die. There is no one exempt from death. A virtuous person who upholds the precepts does not cling to bodily life, but instead constantly thinks with great compassion of rescuing all beings, serving as a guide and model for others. A bodhisattva, you see the new concept here, bodhisattva, does not fear the changes of birth and death. They enter birth and death in order to liberate beings from birth and death. They enter hell to preach the Dharma and precepts, turning evil toward goodness. They enter the realm of the hungry ghosts to teach generosity. They take birth among animals to speak against lust, which causes one to lose human birth. They are reborn in heavenly realms to teach the gods, and among humans they lead others from evil to good. All phenomena possess nothing inherently, only according to one's deeds do names and thoughts arise. You, now a wise one, have clearly seen the truth with your own eyes. You have gained human birth in this world, possess merit and virtue, and uphold the true Dharma. Why not strive diligently and attain the noble status of Buddhahood yourself? Why engage in karmic acts of suffering, since you yourself must bear the consequences? What use is regret afterward? Do you see any similarities or differences between the earliest text and the latest? Right. Of course, I'm comparing apple to apple. We still have a very obvious difference from the latest text because sometimes they emphasize on mantra, right? Especially in the tantric period, we have a lot of mantra. All of the teachings are about mantras. Teach you this kind of mantra to be free from this sickness, that disease, and so on and so forth. But at least in this case, both teachings teach us about the impermanent, teach us about the nature of human, that we all must and will die, and that's why we have to strive diligently. But the difference here is that you can see in from the previous verses, we see that there is no motivation to us to why. So we have that we don't want to be too afraid of death, but in the earlier period it doesn't ask us to help other beings. It's just there. You have to behave like a sage. But in this Mahayana period, the sutra urge us to help or liberate other beings. So kind of the motivation is different. And among other things, the core teaching is still the same, right? So yeah, the last message that I want to say is that let us not just learn the Dharma on Sunday morning on EDG program, let us live it daily with clarity, balance, and commitment. Thank you. So before we move to the Q&A session, let us do the transfer of merits. Join your palms together. May my merit leads to the destruction of the pollutants. May my merit be a condition for gaining nirvana. I share my portion of merits with all beings. May all of them share my portion of merits evenly. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
All right. So do we have any questions from either our Zoom or from in the temple today on our talk?
This one, I have a question.
Sure.
Okay. Yeah, thank you, Venerable Samida, for this wonderful talk. There's a lot of takeaway for me personally from this talk. Really, very inspiring. My question is on about the canons. So Venerable Samida, you did mention that as a practitioner or a Buddhist, we should not just recognize or acknowledge one canon. It should be, like all the three canons. We should not ignore any of them, if my understanding is correct. So my question is, even to master one canon itself, for example, just Pali canon, it probably take more than a lifetime for a normal individual like me. So, how is it possible for one to understand three canons in one lifetime? So,
Okay.
yeah.
Nice. Yeah, great question. So my point is not to understand all the three canons from, you mean, you didn't mean Sutra, Vinaya, and Abhidharma from the Pali Canon, right? You mean all the three canons from three different periods. Yeah,
Yeah.
so my point is not to master all the three canons from all the traditions and from different periods, but to recognize that all canons have the same claim to the status of authority. And in practice, in real world, if you talk about the pragmatic reason, you can only choose one of your preference and study it deeply. Because at the end of the day, when we want to practice the teaching of the Buddha, we can only rely on one method at a time. We don't want to mix things up, right? Unless you want to do the holistic approach of your own practice, that you make it yourself, but I would not recommend it. So you just have to stick on one canon in terms of practice, but just the understanding that any other canons exist out there that has the same claim to the authority.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, Judy?
Yes, Venerable Samhita, thank you so much for a very comprehensive and deep analysis of the Buddhism through the historic view of its moving through time and spaces. A lot to learn and a lot to reckon. I look forward to the lesson. It will be a great lesson to learn, through this lecture. My question is, a few years ago, I remember I saw a report from the Pew research that they study about all different religions, and the end result is the the Christian and the Muslim, especially Muslim, over a period of, I don't remember, but 20 or 30 years or 50 years. Okay, so during the period of time, all of those religions would grow, especially Muslim, because their population are growing. And you look at it, Buddhism is the only one, the population will decline. And I remember I also asked this question to Venerable Ru Yuan. So, and also from our own experience, like for Christian and Muslim, when they go to the church or mosque, the whole family go. All their friends are there. Their wife or husband, the children, they're going to meet their wife and husband during their Sunday gatherings. Compared to that, for Buddhism, we take Jet Buddha Temple, for example. We have so many devoted Buddhists in the temple. And we send our children when they were young to the Buddhist Sunday, the school, and then ask them to listen to the Dharma talk. But pretty much it's only for this generation. All those young people, they never come back to the temple. After all those years of exposure to the Buddhism. So it's a totally different situation versus the other religions. So I asked this question, how this, because Buddha's teaching is so wise and such a universal truth, how can we let more people take advantage? How can we let more people learn about it and spread the message? But it seems like it's so difficult. So is there what's the future outlook? Shall we modify something in a way so we can attract more young people and more people or the way how we practice something? Should we change something so we can let more people benefit from Buddha's teaching? Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for an honest testimony on this current situation of the field. But if you ask me how, you're asking the wrong person, because even though I know the solution, I can only know it from a theoretical perspective. I myself am not focusing on the propagation of Buddhism. As you know, I came from a very scholarly tradition, very academic. So yeah, who's at fault? How do we fix this problem? And my very first impression is that we don't talk about the teaching or the modification of teaching of Buddhism internally first. What we want to fix is you guys. You should bring your family to the temple more first. I mean, the children are not coming back it's not necessarily the fault of the Buddhist teaching that is boring or not attractive enough. Of course, it's a two-way thing. So let's think it this way. We should always start from ourselves. As a Buddhist devotees, we should think that what did I do wrong, right, in helping the propagation of Buddhism? And as a Buddhist monk or practitioner or monk, also Buddhism, how do we fix this problem, right? Yeah, of course, one of the method is to kind of make Buddhism more fun, more clear, so that it attracts more younger generation of people. And to do that, yeah, all units in the temple have to be involved in this practice. So if when we want to kind of make Buddhism more ease, more relaxing, more fun, some from the older generation might disagree with this kind of approach. But at first, I suggest you all to bring more of your family members to the temple. Don't just ask them to come or go, but force them. Sometimes the power of force is useful. I mean, how do the devotees from the other religions do that? It has the sense of force. If we look at Islam, right, for example, they can't change their religion the whole life. If you are born Muslim, you're Muslim the whole life. That's why the rate of Muslims is increasing within the next 10 years, and Buddhism will decline to not decline to 3% or 2%, it's going to be minus. So the development is kind of decreasing very because, yeah, again, we have this concept of very, very opening attitude, right? If you want to come, please come. We are very welcoming. But if you don't like it, just go. We won't restrict you in any way. This is the nature of Buddhism that makes it declining.
So it's
Yeah.
really hard to just for the individual to say, oh, I can do this and do that. It's kind of like culture of the Buddhism and the way of life. And then when some senior monk, even like one of Ruyan. So it's Buddhism is simply just not for everybody. So that's why it's so difficult.
Yeah, that in a sense, that's in the ultimate sense of understanding, but still on the practical level, we still need to push that out. Otherwise, those who want to listen wouldn't have the chance to listen if Buddhism just disappear in the world. Yeah, this is an open-ended question, right? There's no definitive answer for this yet. Yeah. Who else from the temple that has question?
I have a question. So it's Hunter. So one of the things that you talked about in your slides was like to avoid the secularization of Buddhist practice. And to me, it's interesting because things like modern psychology have essentially wholesale stolen lots of Buddhist practices through like mindfulness, that kind of thing. But these kind of practices were exactly what the Buddha was teaching as far as like, this is how, these are ways to address the suffering that's in your life. So it seems that secularization has actually been a benefit in the sense that it has propagated the core remedy that the Buddhists taught to everybody, maybe in more digestible ways. And I wanted to know if you had a thought about that.
Yeah. In the current moment, it is. Yes, it's true that it's been very helpful. But if we think about the long-term period, will it survive in the future for a very long time? Because the fact that Buddhism has survived until today, from 2000 years ago until today, it didn't undergo any process of secularization internally, right? And it still survives even until today without secularization. So that's the first thing. We have to see the long-term period effect. And the second thing is the secularization process by psychology and even mindfulness movement are not done within the Buddhist community itself. So it comes from the outside. So feel from the outside, take something from Buddhism that is useful, and then make it their kind of trademark, something to sell and everything. So it's not the fault of Buddhism, and it's not considered secularization by Buddhism itself. So that's the difference here. Unless one day Jet Buddha Temple are selling a package 5 days course for $100 or $200 for you guys to join, and there's a guarantee that your life going to be better, then that is a secularization from the internal community. So that's different. Okay, Lee went first, and then Felicia.
Okay, thank you. So Venerable Samiddha, you mentioned that Abhidhamma will be part of the talk of this series. So I just wonder if you can give us a high-level introduction on the differences between Theravada Abhidhamma versus Mahayana Abhidhamma versus maybe Tibetan Buddhism Abhidhamma.
Yeah, we'll get into that. High level or not, I'm not sure. It depends on the people's level of understanding. But the focus that I would highlight is only from the northern tradition, of course, with comparison from the southern tradition. You guys are very familiar with the southern tradition of Abhidharma. Have you guys heard of Visuddhimagga? Yeah, that's from the southern tradition. Most teacher from Theravada tradition that teach meditation, their technique is based on Visuddhimagga, which is basically Abhidharma. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Felicia, or wanna speak?
This is Felicie and David Chong.
Right, David.
Thank you very much. I have a couple of questions, maybe on one comment. I think you mentioned that Buddhism started in India, but I think you mentioned it left in as early as about the 13th century. Is that right, after King Ashoka? King Ashoka was a big Buddhism.
Yeah.
But from what I read some places, the big reason why Buddhism eventually left India was Hindu seems more acceptable to people. You look at Hindu religion, it says if you pray to the god for fertility, your cow will give more milk. If you pray to the god of weather, your harvest will be better. So people seem to be gravitated about these promises about if I pray it, things will happen. Buddhism does not have any such thing. So I find it that people just, they want kind of the benefit of doing something. So if that is true, I don't know if you ever heard of it, I can see why it happened like that. And secondly is that in like the other person, what's her name, Judy, mentioned about why Buddhism is so hard. I can add to that. We have 2 grandchildren, and the parents are not interested in Buddhism. I said, leave alone the 5 precepts. If they can just teach them the 3 precepts, just the 3 precepts, it'd be good. But more than that, I believe Buddhism is. See what you think, Reverend. One is, I believe you have to, ultimate goal in our life is to find peace. And I believe Buddhism is what I'm practicing. I can try to achieve that peacefulness in my life. Secondly is understanding how the mind really works. But Buddhism has to try to make it appealing to the kids about, do you really know how your mind works? Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. So I can only comment on on the first statement that it's not that Hinduism was more popular compared to Buddhism at the time of decline of Buddhism. It's just Hinduism was always there from the beginning, and Buddhism arose in the middle and then declined on its own in the middle, and Hinduism was always there the whole time. So it was never the case that people converted to Buddhism and there was no Hinduism at all. And then your point on that Buddhism doesn't have anything such as praying for the deities for something good in life. It's not true. Buddhism has it. That's why I kept saying in the talk that Buddhism has multifaceted. You can see it as a practice of meditation, philosophy, and even devotional thing, meaning you pray to deity, you pray to god and goddesses. It's kind of hard to understand, especially if you learn Buddhism from the Western perspective. Westerners might not put an emphasis on this point. The meditation aspect, the philosophical aspect, the mind aspect that you said just now is the focal point of Buddhism in the Western. But if you go to the Eastern, if you go to Asia, in which Buddhist religion is kind of a cultural thing, like meaning like all Buddhists in Asia, I'm not sure if they are really Buddhists or just because their parents are Buddhist, that's why they are Buddhists, and temples and monks and the devotees are everywhere. That's the whole, the whole vibe of the countries. And in Western, it's kind of different because a lot of Buddhists in Western countries are Buddhist convert, right? Meaning people are coming from different background, and the only thing that they seek for is that what's different thing the Buddhism can offer from their previous religion, to say. So like in Christianity, we also have devotionalism in which we pray to God, right? If you come from Hinduism, we also have a lot of rituals and gods in Hinduism already. So when I convert to Buddhism, if I still keep doing this thing, why would I convert in the first place? I can just keep my own religion. That's why this aspect, such as mindfulness aspect, philosophical aspect, how we control our mind, becomes the spotlight in the Western countries. But it doesn't mean Buddhism doesn't have these kind of things. It has a lot. It's like a Costco. You got everything in it, but you often only go to a certain sections to get what you want. Sure.
Ante, can I ask a question refer to what Eddie just asked? So I thought that original Buddha's teaching, the Nikaya's Buddha's original teaching is all pretty much rational, not a lot of praying to the God, to all that are adapted from the Mahayana Buddhism, adapted from the
again,
Indian,
Yeah.
Hinduism. The original Buddha doesn't have that many prayer and asking for the God to help. The Buddha,
again, when
Right.
we talk about original concept, we have to be very careful because we have no way to know what's the original teaching of the Buddha. We have only the approximate original words of the Buddha, which can be found in the Dharmapada or Atthakatha. I suggest you all go to the Google website and search Atthakatha Vagga, and start reading it. It's very useful. And yes, it doesn't have any prayer or anything, but it doesn't justify that Buddhism only teaches this thing and excluding the prayer. Because throughout the development of Buddhism, prayers are brought in for specific reasons to adapt to the people's place, time, and so on. Yes, so if you want to search from the pure or how do I put it, a more clean-cut version of Buddhism, you can get rid of all the prayers and just stick to the meditation practice, to sila, samadhi, and panya precepts, right? Morality, concentration, and wisdom. This is a clean-cut version. It's true. But sometimes, people still rely on this because as a religion, it has to offer what people need. It's very practical problem and question, and sometimes when we have problems in life, we tend to pray, which is very normal, as in human psychology, to seek out for help. Okay, are we out of time or on time now?
Yes, and I don't think we have any more questions from our from the temple here.
Okay, sure.
So, if everybody will please stand, we will do our bows out. We'll do 3 bows to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. And 1 bow to our speaker, the Venerable Samiddha. Thank you all very much.
Thank
And
you.
have a lovely day. We have